Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Big Purple Blob. We are delighted to be here with you today. I'm Jennie Linton, and I am a therapist, and I'm also a coach for expat moms. And I'm here with Susie, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I am Susie Church Brown. I am a parent and wellness coach at healthyexpatparent.com. And we are here to talk about one of the harder parenting moments. So recently, we have again heard about a school shooting stateside. And I mean, it's super unfortunate to have to say this, but we do this isn't a rare occurrence. It does happen more often than we would certainly like to ever hear about. Um, I'm sort of rambling because it's hard to know what to say, right, Jennie?
It is. They're really upsetting, and I think it disturbs our sense of safety that we like to operate with. I grew up in Colorado where it was one of the very first kind of school shootings, and Columbine was a
Columbine.
neighboring school to where we would always compete with them in athletics. And I remember as a college student seeing it happen and being extremely disturbed and being very upset as a college student, wondering, am I safe to go out and to go to class? And then my siblings actually were involved in a school shooting at Arapahoe High School many years later. I don't know, 12 years later, also in Colorado. And it was probably one of the scariest moments of my life watching on the news what was happening. I was overseas and my siblings were in the school, and we didn't have at that time cell phones to get in touch with them, and wondering were they okay and what was happening. And it's a really, I think, scary dynamic that's developed, particularly in the US, around the world, but especially in the US. And I think it's disturbing for adults, it's disturbing for kids. And I think it's a very real anxiety that we all have at this day and age.
It, and it's hard to grapple with this sort of news as an adult. Um,
Yeah.
it's hard to understand how someone's answer to a stressful or unhappy situation, however long, however prolonged that situation may be, and to jump, their answer to that solution is to take a gun and eliminate the problem, apparently. I really struggle to find the the understanding or the comprehension of why someone would take that sort of answer or take that sort of action. But more so, one, and this is where the parenting element comes in, right? You and I are both parents. How do you tell your kids these sorts of things? Because if we don't tell them, then chances are they might hear about this sort of situation from someone who wouldn't necessarily relay the information in a way that we would appreciate or sympathize with.
Oh, that's such a good question. I would love to answer that, but I wondered if you would share a little bit about your story that you shared with me about your experience with kids discovering this, because I think that's such an interesting illustration of what can
So,
happen.
right. So, I mean, unfortunately, we've had a number of these sorts of atrocities happen in our history, right? Um, One of the situations that we all know about is 911, right? Where the airplanes were used basically as a weapon, and they flew airplanes into the Twin Towers in New York and into the Pentagon, killing so many people. Um, and I remember, I'm sure all of us remember where we were when that happened. This is something that is like a part of our history. And then you kind of fast forward, and nowadays, a lot of the young people that we interact with um, weren't even alive when that happened. So it's not part of their story, it's not part of their history. When I was at a past post, I had the joy and privilege of being the CLO at that post. And we had organized Take Your Child to Work Day. And we were very proud of our schedule. We had all of the offices organizing sessions and events, and just really helping the young people at our post learn about their offices and what they did. And one of the offices, I should say, we did learn about what they were going to be talking about. Most of them, if they had films or whatever that they were shared them with us so we could preview and make sure it was good. One of the offices didn't have their film ready until the day of, and they assured us it was fine, it was fine, it was fine. So we had a fairly rigid schedule where we had the kids broken up into age groups. We had a teenage group, we had a middle school group, and then we had a younger group. And the teenage group was the first group that went into this particular section's session. And I was not the escort for that particular group. One of my co-assistants was with them. And I get this urgent phone call from her. And she was like, oh my gosh, Susie, you would not believe what just happened. I'm like, what just happened? I'm thinking like a child is hurt, a child is injured.
Oh.
Actually worse, their film strip featured kind of a play-by-play, blow-by-blow of the planes flying into the towers. And these children they did not even know this had happened before. And so here was this room of almost 20 young people suddenly being like literally dumped into the deep end. Just understanding how horrifying a group of humans can be towards another group of humans. And it was
probably
just
relatively little context.
right, because this particular film was not made to educate or inform young people. It was made to share with adults. And so we had to very quickly inform the parents, let them know what had just happened. We tried to do what we could to turn this, instead of a session informing about that particular section, turn it into like a discussion about, what can happen with people with bad intent, with these teenagers. And so it was horrible and done completely without any, without bad intent. It was just, I don't want to use the word accident, but it was just a series of errors. Anyway, the point being, like, without intending to cause harm to these children, we're sharing this horrifying story with them, and they had no idea, had not had any sort of like warning, no preparation. And that's not the way anyone should learn about one of these sorts of situations. And I feel like as a parent, like I don't want to tell my 5-year-old about a school shooting, or when there are terrorists that attack trains or concerts or what have you. But on the other hand, I would rather they hear my way of telling them, and my not my version of the story, but my particular details that I would like for them to understand about the story from me, and not from someone else.
Yeah. Where you can shape it in a way that's appropriate for their age and stage and developmental level. Yeah. What a crazy experience. And like you said, I'm sure there was no bad intentions, but I think kids without context, that's a really disturbing experience, and can really shake a child up. My daughter loves the news and is constantly reading about new school shootings, and it's created a lot of anxiety, quite frankly, because she's reading about these. And again, she doesn't live there, which in some ways makes it even scarier, because she's overseas and goes to a school with a compound and guards, and we come home to a gated compound, and there's this sense of safety here. We have bars on our windows, and she goes back to the US, and her biggest anxiety is am I going to be in a shooting of some kind in a public space? Because she doesn't live in the US. So it feels like it's happening everywhere. There's a lack of understanding of it feels common because she's reading about it in the news. And so whether it's like inappropriate, you know, age of sharing, or whether it's lack of context, or whether it's, you know, misunderstanding, I think it's very easy for kids to start to build anxiety about these things, especially if they're not discussed in a way that's appropriate for their age and stage.
So how do we do that? How do we know what they're ready to hear? How do we share these stories with them?
That's such a great question. I think, you know, if we're talking about like the developmental cycle of a child, certainly, I think, as you pointed out, it's important to talk about things and to talk about them in a way that's appropriate. So, as you mentioned, you know, a child who lives in a foreign country, who goes to a safe school, may not need to have a lot of discussions about school shootings that are happening in high schools in the United States. But a child who's maybe getting into middle school or high school may need to start having some of those discussions, especially if those are going to be topics that are discussed in a very information available world. And I think one thing is giving information intentionally and in small doses. So rather than giving it in a way that is overwhelming to them, like you said with this example with the video, where it was just like, boom, you're dropped into it in this really upsetting thing, leading into it very calmly. And I think one way is to ask them what they know and how do they feel about what they know. And they may know nothing, but if they do know something, asking them and letting them be able to unpack that a little bit. And well, I heard this, and I will never forget, it's a little bit different, but when we lived in China when COVID broke out, and I remember my children processing what they had been hearing from friends, and there's this scary illness that's going around, and am I going to get sick, and are we going to die, and what's going to happen? And so I think just asking them what they know, because sometimes as parents, we may assume that they're getting this or interpret in this way, or they will understand that this doesn't affect them or it does. So I think that's another thing. And then I think us being emotionally regulated when we talk to them, being calm and giving facts in context, like, you know, you know, again, asking, have you guys read about some of the events that have happened, like in Georgia in this past, few weeks? What have you heard? What do you think about that? You know, we have some things going on in the United States, and kind of walking them through what some of those facts are. Yes, there were some people who were hurt, and giving context for that. And then I think it's really empowering to talk about to a child, how does this connect with their experience in life? Is this a risk for us here? Is this a risk for us when we go back? Is there a way that we can take an active role in helping these people? Because sometimes taking that active role in helping, maybe they donate money, or maybe they write a letter, or whatever, maybe they decide they want to work on legislation around it, or whatever. Taking some sort of active role can also feel empowering, to not feel like you're just a victim. So I think those are some things that we can do. What are some of your thoughts around it in terms of what we can do to help kids?
Well, I mean, I think one thing that, and this is not a conversation about movies or violence or video games, but I do feel like helping kids to understand when they're watching a movie and the violence that they may or may not see in that movie, and how, same with video games, and how that is not real. And in a movie or a video game, it ends, right? Or you get a redo, or you come back to life. And helping them to understand, especially younger kids, but also teenagers, helping them to understand the difference between that and reality. And and I'm completely anti-gun, so like it's easy for me to say no guns, no guns, no guns. But that's also not a completely realistic expectation of certainly other people, but of my own family. Like they will have a different expectation, or or acceptance of having a gun in the house. But I want them to fully understand that, you know, if you shoot someone, it's for real in real life. It's not, you don't get to have, you know, the next start the game over, or you don't get to rewind the movie or fast forward the movie or what have you. It is real, and it is not something that you can take back. And I feel so that's one. And then the other
Yeah,
thing
what's
is
insight? Separating reality from what feels very normative in our society. Great point.
right. And they're so immersed in what they see regularly in their video games and movies. But then the other thing is also helping them to understand the importance of their words, partly because you know, with your words you can help someone feel better and help them, you know, really heal their health. But with your words, you can also really hurt people. And it can also unknowingly, these little microaggressions and microbullying situations might lead to someone feeling in that sort of that sense of desperation where they have no other action than to make a huge statement like taking a gun to school and shooting the people that are bullies to them. I like to think that my children are perfect, of course, and don't we all?
Obvious.
But we do know that, like, you know, people are different at home than they are in school. You know, if someone is in the corner and they're feeling super alone and they have no one to turn to, well then that sort of desperation and loneliness might be the, you know, the tiny seed that grows into you know, some sort of anger at school or society or their classmates or their teachers or what have you. So just, you know, being that empathetic friend in school, using words that are supportive. I think all of this kind of feeds into helping to create a greater community. And I am not at all like so foolish as to believe that the kids are going to school and sitting around a campfire and singing kumbaya. I know that not everybody gets along all the time, but I do feel like, you know, that generally inspiring a good community helps to take care of the needs, the emotional and social and mental needs of all of our classmates.
Yeah, you bring up such a good point. I love how you're pointing out that these incidents, not only can we help address their anxiety around it, but it can also be a launching point for helping them recognize violence is real, recognize that there is something we can do to help other people in our community not feel left out. There's a very interesting documentary on Netflix called American Tragedy, and they've interviewed Sue Klebold, who is the mother of the shooter at Columbine 20 years ago or 20 years ago. And it's a really fascinating just look into maybe a part of the story that most of us don't get in the news, right? We would hear about so many of these really suffering families of the victims, but we often don't get to hear from the mother, right? The person. And she tells a very interesting story and just how she shows stories of growing up and this cute little boy was her little treasure. And she, as he grew older, you know, became more distant, but she just thought this was him being a teenager. And she did not recognize the signs of deep depression. And in this terrible shooting, which was incredibly shocking to her, she discovered that she lost her own son to suicide. And then she also, in going through his things, discovered what a dark place he was in. And she chose to devote her life to social emotional learning in the schools because her sense of it was, I can't go back. I can't change what happened. I don't even know how I would know. But what is important is that if we can recognize these signs of mental health in our children, in ourselves, then we can then take some actions to help. And so I think you're pointing out that of just looking out for people around you and for your own self when you start to feel those dark thoughts, if you start to feel any inclination towards hurting yourself or hurting someone else, that's a really good sign to reach out and get professional help. because those are signs that you're not well, and there's so much you can do to be helped and to start to feel better, or your child. And so I think this is just such a important topic, both in dealing with experiencing the news, but also in learning how do we use these experiences to improve our communities.
Jennie, thank you so much for joining me for this discussion. I can only hope that we don't have to support our children through more news of these sorts of tragic and traumatic experiences, but at the very least, we can be there for our children and our families and our communities and our colleagues when and if this does happen again. And I think that you have provided some super sound suggestions on how to respond. And any
Likewise.
final words?
No, I think it's an important topic, and thank you for chatting about it. I think these are important things that we can make small steps in our communities to improve, and as parents. Thanks,
Thanks all for
everybody.
joining.
Bye, everyone. See you next week.